Now, we've just been peering into the future, and now is the moment where you have to put up with the scallies that have been running today, Tim, Mark, and myself, having a little bit of a look backwards through the day at some of the key points. And you're all probably sick to death of hearing my voice all day. I've asked Eric from Stream Media, who is really the parent of this organizer of the Content Delivery Summit, to come in and to moderate. So at this point, I'm going to ask Eric to take over, and I'm going to switch my virtual background on so that we can see the sponsor logos. Eric, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much for doing this, Dom. It has been exciting to watch your light change over the course of the day. From mid-afternoon to the late afternoon sunset, and then watch even your slides go into night mode on your screen, getting a little bit yellower. I just want to thank you for putting together this amazing day. It's been a heroic effort that's gone on for 4 months, first planning the in-person event and then pivoting to an online event. And since it's 10 p.m. where you are, 11 p.m. where Mark is, and 5 p.m. where Tim is, cheers.
Oh, I have to go and get a beer now. Well, that's not fair. Maybe you could just ask the others the first question and I'll go and get my cold beer.
Right. Anyway, I always tell people that, as editor of streaming media, I'm not an expert. My job is to find the people who are experts and help their message and their insights and their information get out to our readers and to our viewers. And so really, for this fireside chat, I'm just here to sort of prod you a little bit to talk about what some of your insights were based on the day. And everyone did a terrific job. We've had 8 hours of conversations going on here. So what did you learn today? What was the most surprising insight that came out of all of these presentations and panels that perhaps, like I said, took you by surprise?
I'm going to let the others go first, and I am actually going to run off and get a beer since you did. Talk to the others for 2 seconds.
Well, I was going to say, Eric, since we're doing a fireside chat, I went digging and I found one of my fire sticks, but it's still in a plastic bag, so I don't know what that says. Mark, you had mentioned, was it open caching? Was that the...
It was interesting to hear, not just from, I know SVA is working on this, but both Disney as well as Global mentioned open cache, which was an interesting take that I've never heard before, specifically at a kind of provider. So that was interesting to see that from 2 different angles, really thinking about open cache.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things that I saw, Eric, and this was sort of a meta piece that we look at, we talked about NASA, we talked about the SpaceX launch, sporting events as being streaming first as opposed to television and then streaming. And I think it's part of the economics. It's obviously much less expensive to push it out to a stream these days than it is to push it up to a satellite for full-on broadcast. But I think that's a really interesting point, maybe a corner we've turned in the industry where even live events become streaming first and traditional broadcast if there's a big enough audience. And what that means, I guess, changes over time as well.
I think we saw that even with the Super Bowl this year, right? I mean, this year was the first year that the Super Bowl was not followed a day later by headlines hyping how many people had streamed it. It was just a given that streaming was central. And if you look at the way it was delivered in 4K and HDR, clearly streaming was put first foot forward this year.
Dom, what about you? From if you're back with your beer, what's
the important things are in process. So.
What was your biggest surprise, Dom?
What did I miss? What did I miss from you guys? What was the important? So I don't get repetitive. What was the important take?
Open cache from Mark, and for me, it was sort of the live events like the NASA launch, SpaceX launch, being streaming first as opposed to also running on streaming.
Well, it's great to have Brian in, and hopefully we'll have a chat with him at a later point. But for me, the one of the things that's really stood out, I thought it was quite interesting about the flattening of traffic during the COVID lockdowns and so on. That was quite interesting that the massive explosion of people suddenly discovering streaming and using streaming online, and the normalization of having a drink with your buddies is no longer a geeky thing for people who like internet radio stations on a Thursday, but has become a normal sort of Monday to Friday activity. I think it's been interesting that that explosion has been offset by the lack of live streaming of major sporting events in particular. So that definitely stood out as an interesting observation. I think that was interesting. And I think the other thing was right at the early part of the day, there were two things which really intrigued me. One of them is that I had a real sense that the CDNs and the networks are well ahead of the curve in traffic planning. And you know, if I was going to give people one takeaway from today, the impression I've got is that if your stream is rebuffering, it's probably a local problem. The capacity in the infrastructure, by and large, is actually there. So when it comes to CDN switching and QoS determination through automated switches, I really don't know what metrics they're going to be measuring against, because I think that they're all performing very well. They're all offering all the types of service that consumers are demanding, and the networks underneath them have the capacity to carry the content. So that really stood out for me today. I think as an industry, I think we're in quite good shape. And I think as the glue for society at the moment, I think that's a good thing.
Excellent. My next question, or Tim, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was going to say, Dom, just sort of along those lines, I think what was interesting that I took away along those same points is capacity doesn't equal the delivery constraints. It seems like the whole multi-codec, multiple formats, DRM, packaging still, you know, those multiple permutations or combinatorial issues are the things that do seem to be a problem. So it could be as easy or simple as the local player, as you say, having trouble, not because the CDN can't deliver it, but because the end devices haven't necessarily caught up with that one format fits all model. Local
problems, yeah.
Yeah. I was speaking with someone last week from a major OTT service provider who said, yes, it's still authentication is our biggest hurdle. It's not delivering the stream.
I don't know about you. Sorry to chip in. I don't know about you guys, but I found it quite interesting that the amount of conversation about formats, codecs, and transport technology was actually relatively low for a content delivery summit. I think we have historically had a real a continuous return to diversification of particularly packaging formats over the last few years, but codecs as well have always been hot. Barely a mention of codecs at all today, and while there was a fair amount, particularly Nick's presentation, there was a fair amount of talk about packaging methods and so on. Apart from the low latency ones, which are emergent, I didn't hear a new one, and I didn't hear, although no, somebody asked about, what was it, essential video processing or something? I can't remember.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we'll talk about that briefly tomorrow. Eric, I'm going to put a plug in for Streaming Media East Connect. We're doing a session tomorrow that I'm moderating around AV1, and we will talk about essential video coding because we had AVC, HEVC, and now we've got several other models in place as well. So
Terry's saying that there was no codec conversation because we didn't invite him. He's coming on SMAP. He's coming on SMAP in September, so we can dedicate the entire conversation to video compression. I will probably sleep.
but fair point. I mean, it's about moving data, what the data is, and you even had some references to metadata being as big a problem because you need low latencies to move that, as opposed to video where you can take a 30 milliseconds and not really run into significant problems.
Funny thing,
no Terry, no codecs. Excellent.
Yeah, the funny thing I saw is the word multi. We have multi-codec, multi-format, whatever. We have multi-CDN. We have multi-cloud. My next thing I would think of would be multi-edge. As we all go into edge computing, somehow the word multi and doing playing single, making it more complex for us as an industry.
Everyone's just shying away from multicast. They should just get on with the multicast and get it done.
Well, and Mark, that sort of goes back into your history with like federated CDNs as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you think about that, that still almost becomes a third rail that you don't want to touch necessarily, but it is something that we have to continue to address because everybody wants to do that from a redundancy or failover standpoint.
Okay, so let's follow that up with kind of the opposite question. What did you, and I guess maybe you just answered that with the, by pointing out that there wasn't much discussion of codecs today. But what else didn't come up today that you think should have?
Well, the word blockchain came in once, very small.
Right.
Very small, and for the rest, I haven't seen it at all, which is pretty new to me. I would expect a little more on that.
I'm going to throw one in here, but I'm probably the wrong person to throw this in, but I'm secretly glad that we didn't spend a lot of time pontificating about the future of economic business models and pricing and so on, because frankly, I was delighted to have Nathan's maths presented and see some numbers that actually, were real, really have an effect on the industry and were completely not conjectural. So that was good. I'm delighted we've avoided the pricing topic today.
Well, I think we're almost so commoditized at this point that we could open up a commodities market like they do in Chicago with grain or corn or whatever, and sort of base the pricing or the valuations around. I know that's fairly radical, but I think we have reached that point. Again, if it's data being delivered across networks that can deliver it, at some point it does become a commodity conversation. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're close as we get to edge compute.
But we've been saying that for at least 5 years now.
True.
We're almost there. We're almost there. What do you think is going to get us there?
It sort of takes me back to that federated model. And like I said, that's a third rail that we don't necessarily want to touch. But I thought it was heartening to hear today almost every CDN saying, we're looking at continued peering models. We're looking at continued, partnerships. There's the understanding that every single one of them can't do the heavy lift alone. They have to have those peering for things like what we're facing right now with the pandemic, where there's an absolute massive spike in content that can't necessarily be cached, which means you have to have the transport to be able to carry it.
I think another thing that I thought was interesting that we didn't get too much spillover into the diversification of businesses that the CDNs are offering. So we didn't spill into DDoS protection and security much, and I think obviously that's becoming, particularly in Akamai's case, if no one else, it's becoming a very dominant part of their business and so on. And it's it was. While I think it's interesting, I do think it's kind of like I was going to use a rude word, an illegitimate child of the CDN industry, the CDN business, the security business, because I think it's kind of fallen out of the side of CDN. It's something that you can offer if you have a big globally distributed compute environment, but it's not really doing much apart from black holing a lot of traffic. So I was quite glad that we didn't really fall into the security trap as in today's event. I don't think it would have been particularly on topic.
So Peter Che just brought up something in the chat here, that one of the big things during the pandemic is the explosion of piracy. And I can 100% see that. That's as more and more people demand content and they don't have the services, or if they have the services on a trial for 60 days and then that's gone up, but they don't have the money to necessarily continue paying for it. Piracy is one of those things that will continue to increase significantly through uncertain times. And I don't know if Peter wants to chime in here.
What we're going to do is we're going to, in a few minutes time, we're going to wind up the formal part of the conference, but I'm going to then, and we'll close off the recording, but then we'll let people lift their microphones and maybe we'll just see exactly how chaotic Zoom can get. But we'll let Peter come in and chip in comments or two there. The other thing, just to throw a topic that's kind of close to what Ideas is up to at the moment, is I didn't think there was a great deal of mention of Webrtc. It did come up on occasion. I think it's going to be extremely significant. Although they're not paying subscribers, I do think it's worth noting that in the last 6 months, Zoom has gone from something like 10 million to 350 million users, which is, what, 3.5 times larger than Netflix? I know they're not paying subscribers, so it's not fair to make that a business model, but that is a ton of video streaming going on. Might not be centralized, or it might be centralized. You know, there's all sorts of different ways of deploying it. But if there was a way to count it, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there is coming on for as much WebRTC traffic going on the internet right at this moment as there is for one-to-many HLS dash format content. It's absolutely exploded in the last few months. And I think it's interesting that WebRTC is still a maturing technology and that there wasn't that much discussion about it today. I don't know about you guys, if you share that. Clearly not.
Well, another one which we didn't touch at all, and it's a little bit off topic, but in terms of traffic, I think there's going to be pretty huge, is online gaming streaming. So that has not taken off yet. But once that gets off, that goes big, it can be as big or maybe even bigger than any traffic that we have right now. And the difficulty with this is you can't cache it. So this is going to be a very interesting. I mean, we didn't touch it here because it's a little bit off topic, but it's really something to at least keep in mind.
Well, and Dom, along with WebRTC, I think low latency got a mention, but not a significant mention. I mean, low latency HLS, etc. I wrote 10 years ago that HLS was painting us into a latency corner and nobody seemed to care. But suddenly, you know, in the last couple of years, as live events are being simulcast on TV as well as, you know, on the stream, it becomes a much more important thing because you don't want to hear somebody yell 2 doors down that you know, a Premier League goal has been scored and you're watching the stream and you have no idea who scored. You know, so I think latency and WebRTC aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but obviously there are 2 different paths on the way to do it on HLS/dash versus doing it with WebRTC. And that may not be a CDN discussion, although as Steve Miller-Jones mentions in the comments here too, you know, the CDNs are working on building out WebRTC to scale.
Okay, my last question would be, and you've touched on this a little bit in what we've talked about so far, but for someone who wasn't able to attend today, aside from pointing them to the on-demand version that will be available on the Streaming Media YouTube channel in a week or 2, and we will segment it into sessions there as well, rather than have someone scrub through 8 hours of video. But for someone who wasn't here and wanted to know what were the most important things that they missed, what do you think the top 2 or 3 takeaways were? Dom, you already said one of them for you was that the capacity is there, right? If there's buffering, if there's problems, it's typically happening closer to the endpoint. But what else?
I was buoyed up that there was quite a lot of enthusiasm about the greening of streaming project. I think that bringing power requirement to the forefront of our thinking as application developers, network operators, network architects, and so on. I'm going to bang on about that for the next year and see where that conversation takes us. I think it's very difficult to structure it, which is why the forum we've put together is really designed to be a forum to stimulate that discussion and to find out where we're going. But I do invite everyone here to go to greeningofstreaming.org and sign up to the forum. It's going to be participation led, and my straw man idea is that maybe by Content Delivery Summit this time next year, or perhaps May, there's a particular reason why May, I would quite like to see if we can collectively come up with maybe an informal white paper or some sort of best practices paper which we can distribute out across the industry. I think more as a thought exercise than anything else. You know, we've spent a long time talking about price. The first, you know, CDNs came about because they were cost saving. And then when they fought themselves down to commodity price level, they switched their focus to being performance focused and started fighting on latency and performance metrics. And we've done a decade each of pricing and performance, and it'd be really good if the 20s becomes the decade where our industry starts to focus on power efficiency, and if we can make every process consider the power requirements. You know, do you need to shave 4 milliseconds off your delivery time at the cost of running an extra 100,000 deep edge servers, when in fact, if you just told your punters, you're going to have to wait an extra 4 milliseconds, but it's going to save us a couple of tens of power stations of electricity because we're not running tens of thousands of unnecessary caches. I think that's a good thing. And I think if, as architects, we simply say to our business leaders, sorry guys, we could architect for that, but we're not going to. So unless you learn how to be an architect, you're going to have to deal with it our way and take a bit of a stand. I think there is pushback we can put in from the technical community to say, yes, that might be better for price, that might be better for performance, but actually it's going to be terrible for our power consumption, and that will have other implications on our business. I think if we can start to market our businesses not only on price and performance, but on their green, on their efficiency, and that becomes a badge of honor when we're being chosen as a CDA. And I think that's an important thing. And I've been buoyed up that there's been a welcome response in the community here today on that front. So for me, that's the big takeaway. That was what I was personally looking for. So yeah, that's kind of my big one.
And Dom,
Mark and Tim, before we move on to you, I'll just interject that, Dom, you mentioned hoping to have a white paper or some sort of document issued more or less a year from now, perhaps May. In addition, we are planning, because we did not get to have the in-person event in Boston, we are planning an in-person content delivery summit for Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach, fingers crossed. That would be October 5th through the 7th. But either way, my understanding, Dom, is that you plan for the greening of streaming discussion to take a little more, to have a little more of a spotlight on it than was even there today, correct?
It'd be great if we can get it into the program and it fits with the CDS brand.
Right.
I think that would be fantastic. It'd be great if the forum has got some legs by then, so that we've got some people to come and talk. We're already getting quite a lot of participation in that forum. We've got IEA, Greenpeace, people like that looking at it and getting involved. We've got some political groups, political lobbying groups as well. So I think we could get some legs on that. And I really, really want to hear from everybody who's tuned in today, and anyone who's involved in sustainability, in power, in their organizations. I really do want to sort of hustle them into driving the conversation, just to see where it goes. I think it's an important thing, and we shouldn't brush it under the carpet. And as long as I don't have to quarantine for 2 weeks in and out of the US in October, I'll be there in person. Otherwise, I'll be Zoom one way or another. And also, just one last thing before I let you sort of take it to Mark and Tim, I'd really like to hear from all of the participants today what they thought of it, of Content Delivery Summit as a virtual event. You know, it's been quite an adventure planning this event twice. Today was quite experimental, and you know, Zoom is a pretty good tool. I think we've kind of got through today without too many hiccups. But yeah, we're dying for feedback and so on. So maybe give us some of that in the after chat now, or email Eric, Tim, myself, Mark. You know, just make sure we get some feedback.
So I'll say, Eric, that first of all, Dom, if you need to come in 2 weeks early and, you know, sort of hang out on the beach for 2 weeks, you know, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't know about going back the other way.
You seen my bikini?
Yeah. I don't want to, thank you. But I was going to say, speaking of beaches, one of the things that was sort of fascinating to me as a takeaway on the power side was what the gentleman from Seaborn talked about early in the day, which is when you go into emerging markets, which is the kind of thing that I deal with Help Me Stream and working with NGOs, you can't guarantee that you're even going to have consistent power, and or you can plan to not have power. So when he was saying, oh, brownouts, you know, every afternoon during the hot times of the year are sort of standard, it begs the question there, and of course he's trying to get a fiber lit all the way across the ocean, but it begs the question there of, what can we do from a sustainability standpoint? Are we having to rely on gas generators? Would solar be enough in terms of battery banks and renewables from that standpoint? So a takeaway there that it's not just about the data centers, it's also about the landing spots. It's also about a number of other pieces. And obviously, Dom, Eric, you know that I worked on stuff around DVRs years ago, and we found massive power consumption just because the consumer did want instantaneous access to the device. I still think that's an issue from an educational standpoint that we have to deal with.
And if you look, for me, from what I've brought out as an interesting one for you that we're in here, I still think it's the word edge. We've heard it a lot of times. And like Peter said, it depends on what kind of level you will be executing certain functions within the edge environment. I think at least people need to start thinking about it. I mean, the market might not be ready for it as all, but I think everybody at least needs to think about, okay, what would if we'll be able to do a lot more on the edge? How would that look like? How would I need to build it? How would I need to architect everything to make that actually happen? Because if otherwise, we will never get into that kind of direction.
Well,
Excellent.
I think we should probably head towards closing off the recorded part of the session, and then we might try the adventure of opening the microphones and see what the rabble left in the chat room have to input. But from my point of view, Eric, I'd like to thank you for letting me chair and program this year and somehow struggle along with all of this gadgetry doing the production, because it's been a reasonably interesting day, and I've changed my shirt twice. So it's not often it's so hot in England that you sweat, but it does help when you're surrounded by computers and panicking about 15 screens worth of information. So huge thank you, Eric, for letting me do today.
Absolutely, thank you.
Good luck with the rest of Streaming Media East Connect. Massive thanks to Mark and to Tim for doing an excellent job on moderating the panels and helping me marshal people in the Zoom room and so on. It's been absolutely fantastic. And he's an unsung hero. He did get spotlighted at some point. Where is he? He's somewhere in. He's Steve. Turn your camera on, because Steve's been working around in the background. Where is he?
Yeah, and somebody pointed out Rabble is probably not the. I'm thinking Stalwarts, because they actually made it through 8 hours.
Oh, yeah, and God knows what time it is. Poor old muck at him. It's like 4 in the morning or something. So we need to change the time zoning here. But if Steve is on, I just wanted to bring Steve to the fore here.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Steve,
Still here.
Steve's been slaving away in the background as our producer, just making sure this all holds together. So huge thanks, Steve. You've been a superstar for bringing speakers in and moderating panel. I mean, managing all the panels and sign-ups and so on. And you have the unenviable task now of post-production and sorting out all the sessions. So Steve is the man to email if you want to find your on-demand file. But no, that was great. So thank you everyone, and most importantly, thank you to our speakers, to our panelists, and to all of you for turning up. And of course, we can't go without saying a huge thanks to all our sponsors. So we've got all the media sponsors, Streaming Media Magazine. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring them all up and read them all out, because I think they deserve it. Obviously, we've got the media sponsors, Streaming Media Magazine, and the European edition of Streaming Media Magazine, Streaming Media Producer. We've got Streaming Video Alliance, so go and get involved with their open caching and other workshops if you are so inclined, in the IABM. Verizon Media for their corporate sponsorship, Axello, Mark, thank you. Rack Center, Catchpoint, Coringo for silver sponsors. To our 2 gold sponsors, I hope you enjoyed their videos, Seaborn and Limelight. And of course to our platinum sponsor, Fastly. It's been brilliant. Now, all of those in the participant room, don't jump off immediately, because we're going to stop the recording now. I'm just going to play the sting to sort of mark the end point, and then we'll come back on and have a bit of an informal chat. But thank you once again.